Mia is not her real name, and I should say at the start that she is a composite. There are three women I have known closely whose stories I have woven together for this video because the pattern they share is so specific and so common that I think you will recognize it the moment I describe it. You will probably know Amia. There is a small chance you are Amia. If you are, I want you to stay with me because what happened to her between the ages of 23 and 26 is the most quietly important transformation I have ever watched in another woman's life. And it did not look like a transformation while it was happening. It looked like a series of unremarkable Tuesdays. Mia was, in school, what everyone called the quiet one, not painfully shy, not socially anxious in any clinical sense. Just one of those girls who, by the time she was 16, had figured out that being noticed cost more than it paid, and had quietly opted out. She had two friends. She got good grades without anyone really commenting on them. She dated one boy in sixth form, a kind enough boy who treated her well enough, and they broke up when she went to university, mostly because she did not have the energy to want it more than she did. At 20, she watched her friends become the kind of women who got dressed up on a Saturday night and posted 4 pictures to Instagram in a row and got 80 likes on each. She did not envy them, exactly. She just felt, in a way she could not articulate, that there was an entire register of being a woman that she had no access to. Other girls had a frequency she could not tune into. Some of them were not even particularly beautiful or particularly interesting. They simply had a kind of internal volume she did not have, and that volume seemed to attract everything to them: boys, jobs, friends, opportunities, the casual confidence to walk into a bar without rehearsing the entrance. By 23, Mia was working at a small marketing agency, was renting a flat with a friend she had outgrown by month 3, and was in what she would later describe as the loneliest relationship of her life, with a man who, on paper, was lovely. On the 7th of October, on a Thursday she would later remember in detail, she did something that broke her life open. She didn't mean to. This is the story of what she did, and what happened in the 3 years that followed, and the underlying principle her life revealed, which, if you are watching this on a particular kind of night, you might find that you have been looking for. So make yourself a tea, put this on while you do whatever you do in the evenings, and let me tell you about Mia. The first thing you need to understand about Mia at 23 is that, from the outside, nothing was wrong. This is the part that confuses people, because we have been trained to expect that women break open only when their lives are obviously broken. They are not. They almost always break open while their lives look fine. Mia had a job. It was not a bad job. Her salary was not high, but it was enough. She had a boyfriend, James, who was 26, who had a postgraduate degree and a stable job, and parents who liked her. She had her 2 friends from school, plus 4 newer friends from work. She had a small flat with white walls and a balcony where she sometimes drank a glass of wine in the evening and thought about how nice the balcony was. She had, in short, the life that her parents, her grandparents, and most of the women she had grown up with would have called a successful life for a 23-year-old. Underneath that surface, however, there was something Mia could feel and could not name. She would describe it later as a kind of low, constant static, not depression, not exactly anxiety, just a sense that she was watching her own life from a slight remove, the way you watch a film you are not really invested in. She would go to dinner with James notice and halfway through that she had not actually heard a sentence he had said in 20 minutes. She would post a picture on a Saturday and feel a small spike of something when the likes came in, and then, an hour later, feel slightly worse than before she had posted it, and not understand why. The most honest description she ever gave me of that period of her life was this. She said, "I think I was running on borrowed taste. Every preference I had was inherited. I liked the music my friends liked. I dated the man my friends would approve of. I wore the clothes that the algorithm had pushed at me. I had no idea what I actually wanted. And I think, looking back, that I had spent so much of my late teens trying not to be embarrassing that I had quietly handed the wheel of my life to other people without realizing I had done it." That, by the way, is something I want you to write down somewhere. Borrowed taste. It is one of the most common quiet conditions of women in their early 20s, and it is almost never named because it does not present as a problem. It presents as agreeableness. It presents as a young woman who is doing well, who is easy to be around, who does not ask for much. The cost is invisible until it isn't. The other thing I want you to understand about Mia at 23 is what her body felt like. She did not at the time have language for this. She would describe it now, 3 years on, as tight. Her shoulders were always slightly raised. Her jaw was slightly clenched, especially in the morning. She would catch her own reflection in shop windows and see a young woman who was, technically, in shape, and yet who carried herself like someone bracing for impact. There was no impact. The bracing had become the resting state. This is the body of a woman who has been performing for too long. And almost every woman watching this video will recognize some version of it in herself, because we have been trained from about 13 to be performed objects rather than feeling subjects. The cost of that training is paid in the body. I told you that on the 7th of October, on a Thursday, Mia did something that broke her life open. Here is what it was. She came home from work. She had spent the day in a series of meetings that had been, by any objective measure, fine. She had not been criticized. Nothing had gone wrong. She had been quietly competent, the way she always was. She got home at 6:30. James was at his own flat that night. She made herself a pasta with butter and parmesan because she could not be bothered to do anything more complicated. She poured a glass of wine. She sat on the balcony, and while she was sitting on the balcony, she realized with a kind of detached clarity that did not feel emotional at all, that she had been performing her own life for somewhere between 3 and 5 years. Every single decision she could remember making in that period had been made in reference to what someone else, James, her friends, her parents, her colleagues, her followers, an imaginary audience of women her age who would judge her if she got it wrong, would have approved of. There was, as far as she could see in that moment, no choice in her recent past that had come from her actual preference. She sat with this for about 40 minutes. She did not cry. She did not panic. She just sat with it. The static she had been feeling for years suddenly resolved into a single sentence. The sentence was, "I do not know what I actually want, and I am 23 years old, and if I do not figure this out, I am going to wake up at 34 and realize I built the wrong life." I want to pause here because this is the moment that almost everyone I have ever spoken to about this kind of awakening describes, and almost no one prepares you for. It is not loud. It is not dramatic. It is not the rock bottom that addiction memoirs describe. It is almost always a Thursday evening, a glass of wine, a quiet realization that something has been off for longer than you knew. The breaking point of a young woman's life is almost always embarrassingly mundane. There is no soundtrack. There is no friend on the phone. There is just you and the slow accumulation of years of small abandonments of yourself, and a moment where you are suddenly able to see them all at once. What Mia did next is the part that interests me most. She did not act on it that night. She did not break up with James. She did not quit her job. She did not delete Instagram. She did none of the things that the dramatic version of this story would require. She just opened a notebook, a small one, blue cover, that she had bought at the airport months earlier and never used, and wrote one sentence on the first page. I am going to spend the next 90 days finding out what I actually want. That sentence was the entire thing. I have asked Mia, more than once, what she actually did in those first 90 days. The answer she gives is the answer that most women who have done this kind of work give. She did very little, and what she did was very small, and most of it would not have been visible to anyone watching her life from outside. The first thing she did was leave her phone in the kitchen overnight. That was it. Week 1. No grand resolutions. She just bought a small alarm clock and stopped sleeping with her phone next to her head. The first morning, she woke up disoriented. The second morning, she woke up disoriented. By the 7th morning, she had started doing something she had not done in years. She lay in bed for about 3 minutes with her eyes open, looking at the ceiling and registering what she actually felt like before the day arrived through a screen. Week 2, she did the second thing. She picked up the small blue notebook and, every morning before her phone, wrote 3 sentences. The first sentence was, "What does my body feel like right now?" The second was, "What do I want today?" The third was, "What did I do yesterday that did not come from me?" She did not show this notebook to anyone. She did not photograph it. It was the first thing in her adult life that was not, in any sense, for an audience. The reason this matters, and I want you to listen to me carefully here, is that the single most healing act for a young woman who has been performing her life is to begin, in private, to consult herself. Not journal in the productivity sense, not gratitude in the manifestation sense, just consultation. The slow rebuilding of an internal relationship that has been so long ignored that it has gone almost silent. Week 4, she did the third thing. She told James, in a slightly awkward Sunday morning conversation, that she wanted to spend more evenings alone. She did not break up with him. She did not have a dramatic conversation. She just said, "I think I need to start spending 2 evenings a week by myself, and I do not really know how to explain why, but I need to." James, to his credit, was confused but not defensive. He said, "Okay." The first solo evening, Mia did not know what to do. She watched a film she did not like. The second solo evening, she walked for an hour through her neighborhood in the rain and came home and felt something she had not felt in a very long time, which was that she had a small private life that nobody else knew about. Week 6, she did the fourth thing. At a brunch with her 2 oldest friends, one of them made a joke at her expense that she had been laughing along with for years. The joke was that Mia was the boring one in the group. Mia, for the first time in 7 years of friendship, did not laugh. She just looked at her coffee for a few seconds, and then she looked up at her friend and said, very calmly, "I do not think I am the boring one. I think I have been letting you all decide who I am, and I am going to stop doing that now." The brunch was uncomfortable for the next 10 minutes. The friendship has, 3 years on, survived in a different form. One of the 2 original friends is now closer to Mia than ever. The other is no longer in her life. Both of those outcomes were, I think, correct. Week 10, she ended things with James. It was, again, not dramatic. She had begun to notice, in her morning notebook, that the answer to the question, "What do I want today?" had not included him in any meaningful way for several weeks. She did not blame him. He had not done anything wrong, in the legible sense. He was kind, he was reliable. He loved her in the way he understood love. The problem was that the relationship had been chosen by a version of Mia who had been performing her own life. The new Mia, the one who had begun to consult herself, could not honestly say she had chosen him. So she ended it. She cried for about 2 days, mostly out of sadness for him. Then she felt, with some surprise, a a kind of expansion in her chest that she had not felt in months. The expansion was the simple sensation of her own life arriving back inside her body. I want to pause on the ending of that relationship for a moment, because this is the part of the story that scares women in the audience the most. Not the leaving itself. They have considered the leaving. What scares them is the aftermath. They imagine the loneliness. They imagine the regret. They imagine the call at 3 in the morning. They imagine becoming the cliché, the woman in her late 20s who got out of a perfectly fine relationship for reasons she could not even articulate, and now lives with a small dog and a vague sense of having made a terrible mistake. For Mia, the aftermath did not look like that. The aftermath was, first, about 10 days of grief, which arrived in waves and which she did not try to fight. Then it was about 3 weeks of restlessness, where she did not know what to do with the time that had previously been allocated to a relationship. Then, slowly, it was the sensation of her life expanding into the space that the relationship had been occupying. She began to fill that space with things she had been putting off for years. She started reading novels again. She started cooking properly for herself, not as a performance for him. She started walking every evening, alone, in a way that became almost meditative. The grief did not exactly go away. It just became part of the texture of the new life, the way a small scar becomes part of the texture of a hand. It was there. It was hers. It did not stop the hand from working. This is the truth that nobody tells women about ending the wrong relationship. The aftermath is harder than you expect for about 3 weeks. After that, you begin to remember who you were before. And the remembering is one of the most pleasurable, slow, deeply private experiences a woman can have. There is almost nothing in modern life that compares to it. Week 12, she did the last of the first 90-day things. She enrolled in a part-time evening course in something. It doesn't matter what. For Mia, it was an interior design certificate. For someone else, it would be poetry or coding or pottery that she had been quietly interested in for years and had never given herself permission to pursue. She gave herself permission. The course was 3 hours every Tuesday evening. She loved it from the first night. Within a month, she was a different woman on Tuesdays. Within 3 months, she was a different woman on most days. Before I tell you what happened at month 4, month 6, month 9, I want to be honest about something, because I do not want this video to be a fantasy that you carry into your own life and then feel betrayed by when reality does not match it. The hardest part of Mia's first 90 days was not the breakup. It was not leaving James. It was not the friendship that ended. The hardest part was something much smaller and much more relentless. It was the constant, almost daily, temptation to reach back into the old life because it was familiar. There was a week in the middle, week 7, I think, where Mia almost reactivated the relationship. James had texted her something kind. She had been having a difficult day at work. The familiar shape of the relationship suddenly looked beautiful from a distance. The way the life you have just left always looks beautiful from a distance for the first moment. She wrote a message back. She did not send it. She put her phone face down on the table. She walked for 40 minutes. She came home. She wrote in her notebook. The next day, she felt steadier. This is going to happen to you. If you are at the start of your own awakening, I want you to know that the temptation to slip backward will be most intense around weeks 5 through 10, not at the beginning. The beginning has the energy of newness, not at the end. The end has the momentum of the new life. The middle is where most women break. The middle is where the loneliness has accumulated, the newness has worn off, and the old life still has the gravity of years of habit. The way you survive the middle is by not making any big decisions in the middle. You do not get back together with the man in the middle. You do not abandon the new course in the middle. You do not call the friend who is bad for you in the middle. You just hold. You write in the notebook. You walk. You wait 2 more weeks. After week 10, the gravity shifts, and the new life starts to feel more solid than the old one. From that point onward, it gets steadily easier. Mia held. That is the whole reason her story has the ending it has. Not because she did anything dramatic, because she did not break in the middle. She enrolled in a part-time evening course in something. It doesn't matter what. For Mia, it was an interior design certificate. For someone else, it would be poetry or coding or pottery that she had been quietly interested in for years and had never given herself permission to pursue. She gave herself permission. The course was 3 hours every Tuesday evening. She loved it from the first night. Within a month, she was a different woman on Tuesdays. Within 3 months, she was a different woman on most days. The interesting part of Mia's story is not the inner work, which was slow and unglamorous. The interesting part is what other people began to do around her without her doing anything to make them do it. About 4 months in, her colleagues began treating her differently. The same Mia who had been at her desk for 2 years suddenly had her opinion solicited in meetings. She had not changed her clothes. She had not changed her hair. She had simply, somewhere inside, stopped operating in the slight crouch she had been operating in for years, and her colleagues' nervous systems were registering it before they consciously knew they were. About 6 months in, she got a small promotion. She had not asked for it. Her manager simply said, "You've been doing extraordinary work lately, and we want to formalize it." Mia knew that her work was not noticeably better than it had been. What had changed was that she was now visible in the room. The work had always been good. The room had now noticed. About 9 months in, a man at a friend's party walked over to her, introduced himself with what she would later describe as the easy confidence of a man who is also slightly nervous, and within 20 minutes had asked for her number. He is now her partner. She has said to me more than once that she does not believe he would have crossed the room for the version of herself she was 18 months earlier. He probably would not have. He would not have seen her. There would have been nothing for him to see because there had been almost no one home in her body to be seen. By the time she was 25, the friends she had grown up with had started, separately, sending her variations of the same message. What are you doing differently? You look different. You seem different. What is going on with you? Mia has tried in different ways to answer them. The honest answer is hard to make sound like much. It is, I started consulting myself. I started leaving my phone in the kitchen. I started saying no to small things. I started doing one private thing a week. I ended a relationship that was not mine. I enrolled in a course. I learned to sit alone with myself on a balcony for half an hour. That is the whole list. It does not sound like enough to change a life. It is, however, enough to change a life. The list is small precisely because the underlying change is so radical. She stopped outsourcing her interior. Everything visible on the surface flowed from that one shift. I want to give you the principle because the story is the easy part, and the principle is the part you will need to remember later, on the bad nights, when you are tempted to forget. The principle is this. There are 2 ways for a young woman to live. The first is to live as an object that is performed for an audience. The second is to live as a subject who experiences her own life from inside. Almost every woman in the early 20s phase of her life is in the first mode, by default, because we are raised inside it. Almost every magnetic, peaceful, integrated woman you have ever envied was, at some point, walked back into the second mode. The walking back is what we have been calling this whole episode the awakening. The awakening is not loud. It is not a course you can buy. It is not an aesthetic. It is, almost entirely, a slow accumulation of private acts. Leaving the phone in the kitchen. Asking yourself what you actually want before the day arrives through a screen. Telling your oldest friend that you are not the boring one. Ending the relationship that was chosen by a previous version of yourself. Enrolling in the course nobody asked you to take. These acts are not impressive individually. They are devastatingly powerful collectively because each one rebuilds a slightly larger interior space. And after a year or two of doing them, you have an interior the size of a cathedral, and people walk into the room and feel that interior before they have heard you speak. Mia's life at 26 is not glamorous. It is, by some measures, less impressive than it used to be. She does not post as often. She does not have as many friends. She does not say yes to as much. And yet, if you were to ask the people around her, James, who is still in her life as a friend, her colleagues, the women she meets at her interior design course, what they would say about her, they would all say some version of the same thing. They would say she seems extremely herself. She seems like she is not afraid of much. She seems like she has stopped trying to be liked. That is the whole thing. That is the entire arc. That is what everyone watching this video, on some quiet level, is actually looking for. Not to be more impressive, not to be more beautiful, not to be more successful, although those things often follow. To be, in some real sense, returned to themselves. I want to leave you with one final image, because images stay in the body in a way that arguments do not. When Mia was 23, sitting on her balcony on the 7th of October, she had a thought that I have come back to many times. The thought was, I want to be the woman whose life I would have envied at 16, not the woman whose life looks impressive at 26. The woman whose life would have made the 16-year-old me, the one who already half knew what mattered, sit up and pay attention. That sentence is the entire compass. If you are at the start of an awakening of your own, and you might be watching this on a Thursday evening with a glass of wine and a small static in your chest you have not yet been able to name. Take that sentence with you. The woman your 16-year-old self would have envied is not the most successful, most polished, most posted woman. She is the woman who walks slowly, sleeps well, has 2 real friends, has one private thing she is good at, has a body that is not braced for impact, and does not flinch when she catches her own reflection. You can be her. The version of you who is going to be her is already partly here. She is the one who paused the video at 23 minutes and 12 seconds to write something down. She is the one who, before she went to sleep tonight, is going to put her phone in another room. She is the one who tomorrow morning is going to lie in bed for 3 minutes with her eyes open before the day arrives through a screen. That is where it starts. Not in a course, not in a retreat, not in a man, in a small notebook, in a quiet morning, in a slow consultation with the woman you have been ignoring for too long. One last thing. If you are watching this and a particular man, or a particular friend, or a particular career path has just floated up in your mind as you have been listening, I want you to write it down, not as a decision, as a noticing. The thing that floated up did so for a reason. Your unconscious has been trying to get your attention. The first 90 days of an awakening always begin with noticing what the unconscious has been saying that the conscious mind has been too busy to hear. Mia's awakening began, technically, the moment she was honest with herself that she did not actually know what she wanted. The thing that floated up for you in the last few minutes is the start of your own honest answer. You do not need to act on it tonight. You do not need to break anything tonight. You just need to write it down and then put your phone in the kitchen and then go to sleep. And then, tomorrow morning, Sit with it for 3 minutes before the day arrives through a screen. If you do that tomorrow, and the morning after, and the morning after that, you will, in about 90 days, be a quietly different woman. Not a flashier woman, a more present one. A woman whose interior has begun to fill back up. A woman who walks slowly, sleeps well, has stopped flinching at her own reflection. I am not exaggerating when I say that it is, by some distance, the most worthwhile thing a woman in her 20s can do with her time. The careers, the relationships, the friendships, the version of yourself you have been quietly waiting to become. All of it is downstream of the small private morning practice of consulting yourself before the world consults you. This was the Femme Frequency. I'll see you on Tuesday. Sleep well.